All right. So today we are going to be diving deeper into React Router and looking at React Router hooks. And to do this, we're going to look at another API, the Game of Thrones API, which is pretty cool. And it has a bunch of different characters. And we're going to be building some pages to view not only all characters, but individual characters. And this is going to lead into a big part of what we're going to talk about, which is this use params React router hook to grab a URL parameter. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And we'll do a little bit of scaffolding and review along the way. And then in the second part of the lesson, we will see how to use a more complex hook called outlet context that uses something called React context that gives us an alternative to passing data or functions from a parent to a child component through props. And we'll see how to put that in action again with their Game of Thrones API. So, if I go to, um, and let's see, in fact, if maybe the Rick and Morty API that we've been looking at, they have individual character pages. So this is a URL that we've started to get used to because now that I'm more familiar with REST APIs, I know that this is my host name or domain name, and then this is the route. And so the way that we design our URLs for a REST API is after the slash API, we have the name of the resource we want. If I wanted to get all the characters, it would be characters, except I think I probably need to put a limit or something here for the way the Rick and Morty API works. But then for an individual character resource, I put the ID of that character afterwards. And I think we've all seen this. Like if I go to, maybe we can see this on eBay, and let's just search for a pair of shoes. And we see a whole lot of stuff come up. And let me get rid of this pop-up. And we can probably get rid of everything after this question mark that's in the query param. And what we see here is the way eBay has organized the URLs for their front end is ICITM, which is short for item, and then the item ID. And this is great because if I want to say to a buddy, hey, look at this great pair of shoes I want to buy, I can share that link. I can load it in the browser. I can bookmark this and come back to it later. I can do all sorts of things. And because the ID is here in the URL as what's called a query, or rather a URL parameter, um, I have the information I need. And so a URL parameter is basically a number or a name, but something that actually is data, right? And if I was looking at a different shoe, we'd see a different item ID here. And so our task today is I want to be able to, in my React app, look at the actual values in the URL bar in the browser and grab this URL parameter and do things with it. Like say, fetch all the data about this shoe or fetch data about a Game of Thrones character. Because I'd love to be able to. And let's go ahead and try this out. And let's see who has ID 1. And let's grab the request URL. And here I could run it with curl on the command line as well. And we're getting a nice visual representation of the REST API response. And Sam Tarley, it looks like, is character ID 1. Right. And so my goal for today is I want to build a Game of Thrones app And we'll probably add, a header and a footer, just to keep things looking nice. Actually, I probably won't even worry about a footer for today, but we'll throw in a nav bar. And we know that with React Router, we're going to be using this special outlet component. And inside here, where we see the different pages, the different page components that we create, we're going to want to make one called a character. And let's see here, what's going on with my, oh, I'm way too zoomed out in TL Draw. That's what's going on. Sorry about that. Let's give me just one moment here, folks. I think that's going to be way easier for us to work with. There we go. And let's do a little cleanup here. So I'm going to want to show some information about my character. And, I think we're going to want probably, their name and a photo. All right, so it'll look probably something like this. And we're basically going to make a character card, right? And in fact, what we'll probably end up doing is put all of this into a sort of character card component so we can reuse it for when we get to making many characters. Or I might just name it char card. And we'll just make all that green. But what I'm going to want to do is based on the URL that I have in my browser. So my Vite dev server is going to be running on localhost port 5173. And I think what we'll just do is we'll just add a route for character. And I'll want to have maybe an ID of 1 there. And I want to be able to grab that ID and have my React app use it, because I'm going to want it to then fetch from the Game of Thrones API information about my character, right? And we know that our code is going to look something along the lines of, Axios dot get, Thrones API slash API slash v1 slash characters slash character ID. And this ID is going to change, right? It could be ID 1 for Sam, could be 2 for someone else. It could be whatever. And when you see this colon and then a variable name here, this is sort of a placeholder that says this is a value that's going to change. So this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and this is what we're going to use the use params hook in React Router to do. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions or stuff that we're curious about before we dive in. Chris, yes, sir.
Yeah, the data that use params is pulling it. It's still JSON, right?
Great question. It's not even JSON. It's literally, um, let me in fact go ahead and run my dev server. And we don't have a lot happening in our React app yet. It's pretty simple. I haven't even installed Bootstrap or anything like that. And what I want to be able to do is here in this URL, put this in, and I want my JavaScript code running in the browser to grab this number from the browser and then use it with Axios to make an API call. Does that help answer your question? Yeah, great question. And we'll see this in a couple minutes when we dive in and build it out. So what I want to do next is briefly look at the use params docs in React Router, and then we'll kind of build out the app from bottom to top because I've got to install Axios. I think I'll install Bootstrap. So we'll kind of build out the whole nine. So let's do little bit of a preview of this use param hook, and then we'll build our app and use it. And it looks like hooks that we've seen with React, but we're importing it from the React Router library. We can use it really easily. We call it like we do the use state hook, and it returns an object. And so what we're seeing here is that if in my browser's URL, like up here, I might have an ID number, and we can then use this use params hook to grab it and run it in our React code. To do this, we will have to do some setup in our router. We'll build this for real in a couple minutes. But again, just to do a bit of a preview, we see here the create browser router function we know and love, the array of route objects, and this one only has one because it's an example. And we see here in the path, they actually use the standard syntax to identify URL params with the colon. And so this is telling React Router that this is a variable and this could change. And then this is how, by configuring my route object and then using the use params hook, I can grab values from the URL. All right, let's go ahead and let's write some code. Because I think seeing it in action will be the best way. Now, I do have a bit of setup to do here to get started, because I haven't added much here yet. So I'm just going to start making a list of the things I have to do. I'm going to have to install Axios. I'm going to have to install Bootstrap and React Bootstrap. And I'm remembering that I need to, import the Bootstrap CSS in main.jsx. I'm going to have to install React Router. And I know I need to make that router JSX file. And I know I need to use React Router's router provider in main.jsx, right? And so, I've got my sort of like basic setup steps that I need to do. And then I've got React Router has some extra setup steps. And when I'm working on a project, I really like to get all of my setup and sort of like skeleton code work out of the way. I already have created a components and pages directory. And I think, just to get the ball rolling, like I'm gonna make, I'm gonna want a nav bar, I'm gonna want a home page, and I'm gonna want an about page. And let's make an empty character page, right? And this is using everything that we've learned up till this point, and we're not even going to use params yet. But I really like kind of making this to-do list and mapping stuff out before I write code because now I can focus on the coding part. So let me do some installing, and we have to install a bunch of stuff, and I can add multiple npm packages I want to install on one install command. So let's install Axios and Bootstrap and React Bootstrap, and I think it's React Router dump. And we'll give npm a minute. And those guys are installed. I might have actually installed them before class started. And again, this is why I really like writing stuff out and kind of separating my planning and my coding in sort of like little steps like this. And we might as well run this audit fix force command. Um, I actually don't recall exactly what bit of Bootstrap CSS I need to import. So I'm going to pull up some guide code, which is what I always do when I'm writing code. I always have on a second monitor, either like the same code base and I'm looking at something else as an example or some other code that I've used before. I really try not to remember anything because this stuff is too complex. And somewhere in here, I know here's the bootstrap line that I need, and it goes in source.main. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Normally, I really encourage everyone to type everything out for learning purposes. Um, I think if it's something where like the risk of like making a typo or getting it wrong outweighs the learning value from manually typing it, copy and paste, right? And over here, I see I have this strict mode that we know we don't want. So let's get rid of that. And I think I want to run my dev server because I get nervous if I go more than 2 minutes without running code to make sure I haven't done a typo or something silly. And we see here that the bootstrap styles are being applied to this H1. So I know that I'm good to go. So let me hop back to my implementation path here. So we've installed Axios, we've installed all that stuff, we've imported that. And now I think up next is my React router setup. And there's actually some extra steps here that I forgot. Um, in my skeleton, I want to use Bootstrap layout in app or some basic layout. So we'll get there in just a minute, but I just want to make that note to remember. So now for React router, I have to make that router object. And again, my memory is terrible. I am going to pull up the guide code, and I'm just going to, again, use our curriculum. And let's just scroll down a bit and find what we need, right? And this is worth typing out for learning purposes. But this way, I'm not trying to remember every single step of sort of the more manual parts and the more rote sort of boilerplate parts just from pure memory. So I've got create browser router created. This red squiggly is because I haven't used it yet. So let's go ahead and just make VS Code happy. And we're going to give it an empty array of route objects, but there's nothing in it yet, which is fine. And we're going to export it as a default export. And now I want to import my app component because this is our parent route for the whole app. And now I'm going to make my first route object. And it's going to be on the root or base path for the whole app. And the element we're going to use is the app component. And we don't have any child routes yet, but we know we will. So I'm going to make an empty array and leave it there. And I see a red squiggly here because I need to export the correct thing. And so far, so good. I'm not using any of this code, but I also see nothing is broken. So now let's use our route object in main.jsx. And this one, I think I kind of remember what I need to do here. I think I need to import router provider from React Router DOM, and I'm no longer directly mounting the app component. I'm mounting the router provider, and the route I'm going to give it is my actual route. So I actually need to import that as well. And I kind of like to try and keep stuff organized. Um, like here are external packages, here's CSS, and then here's like my components and stuff. That's from my source code. So let's import my router object and use it here. And fingers crossed, I see I have a problem, but I also know that React Router is working because I'm seeing its default error message. So that's a great sign. And I'm going to have my console open because I always want to be able to see the errors that get thrown up. And we see this error message, no routes matched location character one, which makes sense. Now that I'm using React Router, it's going to care about the whole URL, and we haven't created a route for that. So it's saying, hey, this route does not exist. And now we are back to our app page. So we're making good progress here, right? I've installed React Router. I've created this router component, and I'm using the router provider. As I'm thinking through this and I'm kind of looking at my next steps, I'm realizing that when I make my home page, I'm going to need to create the route for it in the router, and I'm going to have to do that with the about page too. And I'm going to have to do that with the character page too. So I'm going to add that to my to-do list. And I just want to pause here while we're kind of getting warmed up and see what questions folks have, or if there are things that might be good to review or go over with React Router and these setup steps. Rick, yes, sir.
Yeah, two things. One, um, I second you on the having code up because that helps me with like syntax. If something requires like a curly brackets and I don't quite remember that, it's always nice to have example code up to go, oh yeah, curly brackets.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
but the question I have, um, it may be kind of taking a step back, but I've always been kind of curious, but I keep forgetting to ask. But what is the difference between using the built-in fetch function in React and using Axios? Why? Because like yesterday, I didn't think to use Axios and I just use fetch and it worked just fine. But what's the difference between just using the built-in fetch function and using Axios?
Yeah, it's a great question. Axios basically gives you more features. When we start doing post requests and delete requests and put requests, Axios will make it easier. Um, Also, fetch used to only live in the browser. If we were writing Node.js code that was running outside the browser, like if we wanted, instead of Flask, to use Node.js and JavaScript to write a server, I think we'd have to use Axios. Yeah, good question. Fetch totally does do the job for basic stuff. Just as the projects get bigger, Axios will make your life easier. Cool. Yeah, great question, because we totally could use fetch. And hopefully kind of seeing this coding workflow is useful. And this is pretty similar to like my workflow when I'm actually writing code. Now, obviously I've done this particular writing of code many times, so it looks way more polished than it is when you're, doing something new or figuring stuff out as you go. The real process is much messier, but it's still along these lines. I just sort of do it in smaller chunks. And my goal is really to get as much out of my brain as possible. And Rick, I agree with you. I like to have the guide code up. And again, I just want to emphasize having guide code up is great. The rule is you have to make sure you know what the code is doing and take the time to read through it. Like if I look at a Stack Overflow post, I might take 20 to 30 minutes to really dig into it. and for learning purposes, type it out, right? Unless it's something really, really tedious, because the typing will help get it into your memory. All right, so we've got some basic React router set up, but we don't have much interesting happening yet. I don't have a nav bar. I don't have layout. I don't have anything like that. So let me go to my app and let me refer to my diagram, right? Because now that I have this diagram and I wrote it before I started coding, I know where I want to end up. I know I need a nav bar component. I know I'm going to need an outlet, and I know I'm going to need different pages. So I think in the app, what I'm just going to do here is we'll make a couple notes. We'll say, you know, nav bar goes here. And we're going to want to use the bootstrap container component. And it's not imported, but if I right click, or if I do the sort of command dot, it looks normally it auto imports for me, but we'll just import it the manual way. And I know that I'm probably going to want to have some rows and some columns. And so I've got containers, and I'm probably going to want a row and the column, and inside here, I'll put the outlet when we get there. And again, I'm just going to keep my code up as a guide. And actually, as I'm looking at this, I realize I really want the container at the top level because this H1, I want Bootstrap to do the nice styling for as well. So this is actually going to be a row above the navbar. And again, you can do this with Tailwind. You can do it with CSS and Flexbox if you want to do it totally from scratch. And now I've got my sort of app skeleton laid out. And as I write more code, it makes it way easier to do this. Chefs have a term called mise en place, which means like organize everything. And I find once you figure out like the way that works for you to keep your code organized as you go, that life gets way easier. And I'm going to leave the dev server running. I'm going to open up a second shell session and go into our project. And I know I need to make a bunch of components. So I'm going to make my navbar component. I'm going to make my, and that's really the only component actually. But then in the pages directory, I know I'm going to want to make a home page. I'm going to want to make a character page. And I'm going to want to make a about page. And so I've got my pages and my components. Let's tackle this navbar. And I'm going to use the Bootstrap navbar. And again, using guide code, I'm just going to pull up React Bootstrap's navbar. And again, following the rule, I want to make sure I understand what the code that I'm using as guide code is doing. And in this case, while ideally I want to take the time to really read through every single line, the main thing is getting comfortable enough to know, like, I want to get rid of this dropdown once I, use this. And with Bootstrap in particular, because it has so many moving parts, I think this sort of level of copying and pasting is okay. And now that I've done that, before I even touch this navbar, let's put it in the app. And in fact, it looks like I probably want a row and a column. And let's put in our navbar, and let's import my navbar. And I'm going to make sure that it's coming from my components directory and not the bootstrap navbar by mistake. And it looks like I have a naming issue, which is not terribly surprising because there's so many things with similar names. And the issue here is the bootstrap component I import is named navbar, but the component I'm created, I named the same thing. So the two names conflict. So with default imports, or with imports, you can actually use an add. And actually, I don't want to do that here because there's so many things that depend on this. So what we're going to do is we're going to export as my navbar to keep it simple. And the beauty of the default export and import is you can use whatever name you want. So this works okay. I think simply to be consistent and not lose my mind, I will use the same name that I named the component as. And we're trucking along. It looks like I do have some sort of error here, so let's see what this one is. Because I'm not seeing my nav bar show up. I wonder if the Vite dev server just kind of ran into trouble. And sometimes it does that if you change too much stuff. And I'm not sure what this error is, this output dependency. Error while updating dependencies. You know, I normally the issue is always in my code and it's not other things. Let's comment out the navbar. And we see that same error message. I did sort of see. We'll try one more thing. Okay, so clearly in my navbar, I've done something silly. So let's see if we can kind of track it down and figure it out. We have all of this here. We have export default my navbar. We have the return statement. So I'm a little unsure of what's causing this error. I think I'll take like just a minute to look at this and then push on. I am going to simplify. I know I don't want this navbar drop down. So let's just get rid of that. I seriously doubt that's causing the error, but I'm just trying to simplify things so I can figure out where the issue is coming from. And we have export default my navbar. And if I go to app.jsx, we have import my navbar. And we run into this same error. Two output files share the same path but have different contents. I wonder if this is an issue of, no, the navbar is not even inside a container. So this is highly unlikely, but I am going to delete the node modules directory. And we'll reinstall stuff. And if this doesn't work, I'll just push on and we'll skip the navbar. And it looks like the npm install step is giving me an error. And no, we're seeing the same kind of error here. Let's actually Google this one. This one might have a quick fix, and then if it does it, we'll move on. So this is good news. We're seeing a Stack Overflow post, and the AI is giving us a bit of an answer. Um, this is getting a little into the weeds with what's going on. Um, I'm honestly not sure what is causing this. But let's try what they suggest here, and then if that doesn't work, we really will move on. Yeah, and yeah, and I apologize, guys. We've gotten a little lost in the sauce on this one. So unfortunately, we're just gonna have to push on and ignore the nav bar, and I'll figure out what's causing that later, and we'll come back to it. And I suspect there may be an issue with these import statements. And this is the worst kind of error to have. I have a lowercase c here for container, and it's uppercase, which again goes to show some of the issues with copy and paste. And yeah, you know what? I'm not sure what's causing this. I apologize. Let's take five. I probably should have taken 5, 10 minutes ago. Let me debug this offline, and we'll pick this back up. I do apologize. Take a break, get off the screen, and I'll see everyone in 5 minutes. Thank you, guys. All right. I ran into some sort of issue there with Bootstrap. Um, Normally, whenever you think the problem is not in your code, the problem's in your code. I don't think the problem is in my code, but the problem is probably in my code. However, I can't figure it out right now. V was weird the other day, so it's not impossible that there is some sort of weirdness going on with V or Bootstrap. But I could not resolve it, so I just ripped Bootstrap out and installed Tailwind, which is probably what I should have done right off the bat. So my apologies about that, guys. Just to sort of orient us, and then we can pick the ball back up. Um, I didn't actually uninstall Bootstrap from Node modules, but I got rid of importing the Bootstrap CSS, and I'm not using Bootstrap anywhere in my code. So for all intents and purposes, it's not being imported and used in my React app. And I installed Tailwind. I added the Tailwind CSS plugin we need to our vconfig and to index.css, sort of the main CSS for the whole app. I imported Tailwind. And so over here, I've simplified the nav bar dramatically. Honestly, Tailwind's great. We have a simple flex box here, and we can see that you know it's in action here. And we'll just give it like um, a background of amber. And we'll leave it like this for now and call it a day and keep on pushing because we already got a bit lost in the sauce there. So a lot of this bootstrap setup stuff is kind of now supernumerary and not needed, but we still got to make our skeleton. I still want a little bit of layout here and some divs to deal with this. So I am going to, I'm just going to wrap my whole app in a div. And I'm going to give it the class name Flex, so we can use Tailwind's Flexbox. And we'll do, I believe it's Flex column. And so now I can have columns, which is really what I want. I have my header, I have my nav bar, and in here is where we will put, outlet. We'll go here. And in fact, let's just go ahead and do that now, right? And we'll kind of get our brains back in React router mode. So I'm importing this special outlet component from React router DOM. And briefly to hop back to our diagram to orient us, we hit the bootstrap challenges, but we have a nav bar inside app. We're going to use outlet so React router can render the different pages, right? Once we have different pages. And so we're going to start making our different pages now for the outlet to show. So right now there are no pages. So this is empty. But I know that I'm going to want an about page. And as long as I'm kind of, using Flexbox and going to be using page templates, I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a page template here that I can reuse. And I don't know if we'll need like page stylings, but we might as well do border 2, and we're going to put the page header in an H2. If my pages get fancy enough, I might actually want like a standard page component that I would pass page information into as props. But for now, I just want to keep it simple. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste this in for our homepage. And now that I have a homepage, let's add a route for it so I can make sure that my code is working. And so here inside the router, I now need to add my child element for my homepage. Because the homepage I want to show up by default on our base route, I set index to true. And I say element is homepage. My other child route is going to be the about page. I need to give a path for this, which is going to be relative. And the element will be the about page. And so now I see my homepage show up. There's not a lot of stuff there, which is totally fine. It'd be nice if I could click on some links to go to my homepage and about page and to test out that the about page is working. And it looks like I have a typo probably in one of my pages where I used class instead of class name somewhere. So let's see if we can't track that down real quick, or that it may have been resolved. And I'm not sure where that one is coming from, so I think we'll let it sit. I did see I have a typo there. So let's go ahead and let's use the React router link component so my nav bar can come to life. So we're going to import link from React Router DOM. And then here, I'm going to keep this containing div. Or actually, what we can do, which is even better, is let's do link to home and link to about, and we'll kind of comment out these divs. And I see that the links work, but they don't look very nice. And because these are React components, like any React component, I can add CSS classes to it. So let's just apply our Tailwind stylings directly. And now I've got a nice homepage, an about page, and I know I also want my character page, which we'll flesh out later. So again, I'm going to kind of copy my page template and put it in here. And the one thing you have to be careful with copying and pasting and reusing code is to not introduce typos or problems. And this is where it starts to get interesting, because I can add a route for a character. And I can use that element and I could even add it to my navbar. But I want to grab a URL parameter so that I can show different characters. And in fact, I really won't be able to, it really shouldn't be up here in the navbar, but we'll cross that bridge in a minute. Let's just put the use params hook into action. And like we were talking about with guide code, there's no reason not to make life simple and have the docs up here as I'm doing this. And let's use this and see what we need to do. So first off, I need to modify the path in my route. So it is now character slash, and we'll just say ID. We'll keep it really simple. And now on my A character page, I need to use React Routers use params hook. And let me get some indenting fixed here. And let's just console log out params to see what it is. And let's just add a console log so that I know I'm on my A character page. And let's see what use params gives us so we can play around with this a little bit. And we're seeing a couple errors here. And the reason that we're seeing this error, and let's go to the home page and we can play around. So home and about work, but when I click on A character, I now get an error. And the error says no routes match location character. Right? And that's the key part of the error message. There's all this other stuff, but this is the main part. And the issue here is this route slash character no longer exists. In my routing logic, I have now said that this path has to have some sort of value after it. Right? And so I actually have to have, it could be anything. React Router doesn't know if it's a number or a string. It could be cat. And here, if we look at our character page and the console log, and let's add a nice print statement here, URL params object. We see that I've got my character, my param, cat, and that React Router DOM has created a JavaScript object and assigned this value to a property named ID, right? And so this could be 2. It could be hello world. And if in the router, I change this part here, this is like changing a variable name. And now we see that this URL params object has whatever we put in there, right? So I can set the param. And in fact, if I want nested parameters, I could do it like this. And again, we get the error because now the route has to have 2 parameters. And we see that that params object gives us 2 things. Right? Now we're not going to use nested params too much today of like multiple URL params. So I'm just going to leave this here as an example in the code, but we're really only going to use one today. So I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have and what people are curious about, because this is sort of the heart of part 1. How are we feeling about the use params hook?
Where do you implement it again?
Yeah, so we do it in 2 places. The first thing we have to do is in router.jsx, where we are adding all of our routing logic for React Router. And remember, this is front-end routing. This is never going to the server. This is all about what's in the URL bar of my browser. So first, I got to go to my routing logic that I want to change. And so for this character page, I know that I want there to be a URL param so that I can do character /2, right? And really, I want the name of this URL param to be ID. So rather than a path that just looks like this, I add a slash. I need to add the colon to tell React Router DOM this is a variable that we're creating, a URL parameter that can change, and I give it a variable name. And then I go to the page component where I want to use this. And I use the use params hook and I call it, and it will return an object with all of the URL parameters from here. And so here we see 2, and use params has taken it and assigned it to an object with a property named ID. All right. And if I did, console.log params.id, or I do character ID is params.id, we now see that value.
So you said component or the page?
A page is a component.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'll try to use the word page moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I saw a bunch of hands up. Arnold, yes, sir. Oh, you might be muted, man. Let me circle back to you. We might have lost you. Tom, I saw you had a question as well.
So I get that it's implemented in the path and on the component as well. But what are we actually trying to return with the parameter hook? You're muted.
Let me unmute myself here. Great question. let me do a little bit of a split screen so we can kind of focus on the relevant code, and then we can do a quick preview of that. And I know there are a couple more questions, and then I think we can take, and then it's probably a good time to take a break. So let's do a bit of a split here. And so over here, I've got all of my different routing logic, right? And so what I'm saying is this route or path starts with character, but then it has to have something. And here in the URL bar, we can see that we've got hello world. And I'm running out of screen real estate here a little bit, so I do apologize. Maybe the split was a little over ambitious. So we change that path. I use this use params hook. It returns an object. Use params returns an object that has all the URL parameters as key value pairs. Right? And so up here in my browser's URL bar, we defined the path like this in React Router DOM. So when I put 1 here and hit enter, React Router DOM grabs this part of the URL, adds it to an object, gives it that property ID, and then I can work with it. And I can then do something like import Axios. And maybe what I want to do is let's in fact import, let's grab use effect and let's grab use state. And we could write a use effect for when my page loads. And we could say, when page loads, use the ID URL param to get character data from the Game of Thrones API. And if I hop over to the Game of Thrones API, and I got to close out some of the things we're no longer using, and let's just grab this URL here, which is exactly what we want. And instead of hard coding in character 1, we use params.id. And I do need to add a wait. And I do need a try catch block because we're going to be doing this with promises. And if I start speeding up too much with the code, please let me know. And I also need to add that empty dependency array on the use effect. So this use effect fires after page renders, use effect fires, and it will use that URL param. And it looks like I have a couple typos here that need to be fixed. And this one's pretty big, but the fact that it's giving me an error here is promising. Oh, it would help if I called get character It looks like I also did something silly with my arrow function, where indeed there is a lot of syntax. So I needed to create an async arrow function with the open and close parentheses. And now I actually want to call that function. And now, and let's just clear all this so we have a nice clean console and everything. I can go to my home page, and if I type into the URL bar here, character/1, React router navigates us in the browser in JavaScript. It loads our page component for a character. When the page loads, because I have this empty dependency array here for this use effect, after the page renders, it fires this use effect. And then I have this get character function that makes my API call to the Game of Thrones API that's grabbing that ID. Right? And so now, based on whatever that URL param is, I can get different characters, right? Because now I have Brandon Stark because he has ID 5. And Tom, I know that went a bit far afield from your original question, but I want to check in to see if that helped clarify things.
Yeah, no, that actually was the question that answered it. I was trying to get to you, but you were on a roll. In the use effect, because I saw Francisco do this the other day, but I saw that we didn't need to pass anything in for our get character. Um, why is that? Or when would you need to pass something into your async into those parentheses there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't need, and let me break that into two parts. In this situation, I don't need to pass in an argument. Like if I had different character IDs or whatever that I would pass in as an argument and use in the function. I don't need to do it because I'm always going to be looking for one variable, this ID URL param. It's defined up here outside of the function, but JavaScript still has access to it. The same way where we can I could create a variable and in the line below create a function and use that variable inside it. So JavaScript can grab that. It's called a closure, which I don't want to get into too much, but I think we've all seen that in action. If I needed to get like 5 different characters on this page, then I couldn't just use the same value all the time, right? So if it's going to change, then I probably need an argument so that I could call it, if I was doing something like this where I needed to do it a bunch of times for different values, then I would pass in the argument. But in this case, because the job of this page is just to get one character, we don't need to. We'll see that later. Actually, we'll make a page where we get a bunch of different characters, and indeed, then we'll need to do that. Yeah, great question. Arnold, I know you had a question earlier as well.
Yeah, sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, it's just a simple question, but how were you able to implement the nav bar in the different pages? Because I noticed you were like clicking around and the nav bar still is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a little lost in the sauce earlier with Bootstrap and stuff. So let's hop over to our friendly TL draw, because I think this is always a good starting point. And I apologize that the stuff is sort of getting in the way here a bit. So if we look at this, we've got a couple parts here to my app design. And let me grab the annotator. So we've got the app component, and inside that is outlet. And inside that, it renders individual pages, and I have a nav bar. And in fact, I think another good way to show this would be, let me do this sort of tree diagram style. if I have app, and this is our parent component, app has a couple components inside of it. And in fact, let me pull up the code for app while we're looking at it. And we'll scroll all the way down here just so we can see. The short answer is the nav bar is outside of the outlet. And in fact, let's just get rid of this div that we don't really need just to like keep life simple. So without really worrying about the divs, our component hierarchy right now looks like this. I have the H1. I have my nav bar, and then I have the outlet. And the outlet is special, right? Because what the outlet does is it does conditional rendering. And so I have all of these other page components, right? I have about page, there's the home page, and there's a character page. And the outlet can render any of them, right? And that's the magic of React Router. So I've got, again, without worrying about this div, my H1, my nav bar, my outlet, and that's my component hierarchy. And we use that React router page to tell the outlet, like, hey, when you go to this URL in the browser, have the JavaScript show the about page. And so because the nav bar is always there, and I need to fix the a character page, but that's why when I navigate to different things, the nav bar always stays there. Does that answer your question?
Actually, yeah. So you put the fancy nav bar, that's your nav bar in the app.jsx, and then you don't have to do that in your router because it's always going to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if I wanted to, like, let's just add a div here and use it as a pretend footer. And through the beauty of Tailwind, we'll just do background, bad, and we'll just say footer. Same deal where because it's not in the outlet, it always stays there, right? And I see that the outlet's in the middle, and if I wanted to do something silly, I could put the outlet, with the page on top, but it's not gonna be a very nice user experience. Alex, yes, sir.
To build on top of that, in the components directory, did you create a fancy navbar component?
I did create a
Or-
fancy nav bar component, yes.
Okay, and is that fancy navbar component linked to the one that's in the app.jsx file?
It is, yes. And when I ran into some bootstrap issues, I got the names a little mixed up.
Right.
Because this is a default export, when I import it, I can name it whatever I want. In fact, I should just name this navbar because
Mhm.
you do want to try to have the component name be the same as the file name so you don't lose your mind and can have things stay organized. And so we can see that doesn't break the code and it works just fine. And I might as well just rename the actual component to navbar now that we don't have the bootstrap issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And
we export it We import it, and then we use it.
Got it. And do you want to create a component for every, I guess, instance you're gonna do this? So say for the footer, right, you don't have a file in your components directory for a footer, but is that just because the footer right now has no functionality?
Just for simplicity, in programming, there's something called the rule of three. If you repeat yourself 3 times, maybe it's time to write a function or a class to sort of do some of the heavy lifting for you. It's called making an abstraction, right? Because when I look at this nav component, I don't have to think about what's inside it. I can just use it. Like in some ways, it's abstracted away. We don't quite have the rule of three here, but basically start out little, and if it gets big enough, turn it into a component. The more you do it, the more you'll be able to identify early on where you want things. Like with the nav bar, I knew we were going to be adding stuff to it right off the bat, so I just made it here. It's a little bit of dealer's choice. It's a little bit of personal preference. If you guys aren't sure, I just recommend making components for everything, because that way, when you're designing in TLDraw or on a piece of paper, you can kind of think of your UI design in terms of components. And I think that might be an easier way to start.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right, let's do one more thing and then we'll take a break. So we've made a lot of progress here. And just to recap, I have updated my routing for the character page so that it now has to have this parameter after it, right? If I just do character, React router complains and it says this route does not exist, because it doesn't, because the path to render the character page is now character slash something, a parameter. And when I add in a parameter, React router DOM will assign it to a variable named ID. And I can then use that parameter in my page with the use params hook from React router DOM. And I call use params and it returns an object. And then that object has properties for each of the different URL params. If I had more, then we'd have more properties, but we just have one here. And in fact, I want to simplify this a bit. I want to just go ahead and destructure that object, which I know can be a bit confusing. And so I think what I'll do is let's leave that there as comments, and we'll do the destructuring here so that you guys have that as a reference. Because as you write more React code, again, you'll just see that that's the convention. And it does make life a bit easier, because now when I'm writing code, I can just say ID. And then down here, I can just say ID. So this is great, but this A character link doesn't do me any good. Because if I look at my nav bar, I see that it's straight to nowhere. And I would need to add a character ID to make it work. But that's not very useful, because now I'm always showing the same character. And I wonder, I think I got rid of a console log that is getting rid of something. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But where I'm going with this is I really need to do this a bit differently. And I think what I want to do now is let's go to my home page. Let's import the React router DOM link component. And let's just add a list of characters. And we'll see in a moment which character has ID 7. I'll just say ID 7. And let's just see if we can't get this working. So now if I click on this, it takes me to the character page, ID of 7. If I look in the response data, I see it's Robert Baratheon from House of Baratheon. So let's go ahead and change this. And now on my homepage, I can click on Robert Baratheon. Let's do the same thing for Sam Tarley. And I'm starting to build up a list of characters, right? We can add a little bit of styling. You know, we might want to have this be a flex column. And I probably need to add a class name here to get these links to show up on different lines, but I'll worry about that later. But now we can start to build up a list of different characters and navigate to see different characters. Why don't we take 5? And then when we come back, we'll take this part home. Because the last part of our journey here is I want to see information about my character on the page. And after that, we can take a longer break and then we'll see how to use React router's outlet context. Sound good? All right, awesome. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And I will see you all in 5 minutes. So we've covered a lot of ground here. You know, use params by itself is relatively straightforward. We learned that I can change a path for a route object to have this variable. And then I can use the use params hook in my code to grab that variable. And that variable is going to be whatever I put here into the URL bar. We had a couple twists and turns along the way. And hopefully, has it been useful to see kind of building this app up from the bottom up? Okay, awesome, right? We had the to-do list. We got a little off the rails, but then we got back on track. And we now have a character page that can look at the URL bar, grab this ID URL param from it. And then after the page renders, call a use effect to hit the Game of Thrones API and get that character data. So my next step, what I really want to do is I want to show that character data here, obviously. To go back to our diagram, I want to take it home and inside my character page, I want to show, you know, a character's name, a photo of them, and, you know, probably some sort of information. And I want to make this a separate component that we'll call character card, because in a little bit, what we'll see is rather than, you know, hard coding each individual character here, I might just want to hit the Game of Thrones API to get all the characters. And maybe then just show the first 10. And maybe I even want a page with my favorite characters. And so our page is going to get more complex and we're going to have characters all over the place. I did do a little refactoring of our homepage. I just cleaned up the links a bit with the divs so that they're on separate lines. So let's go ahead and we're going to make a character card component that we can use on the character page that's going to show information about a character. So I know that I'm going to want to make a component. I'm going to use Emmet to give me a nice starting point. And I know that I'm going to want to have some sort of H2 that has the character name. And we're going to want, you know, image goes here. And, you know, we're going to maybe want, it might look something like house something like that. And now I have a skeleton of a character card, and there's no data, but I can import the component and make sure that it renders. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. I'm going to go over to my character page, and let's go ahead and import and use that character card component. And there's nothing interesting here yet, but we're going to fix that in just a minute. And I think what I actually want to do is go to my network tab. Let's look at one of these API calls. Let's actually look at the data that we're getting back. And I'm feeling lazy, so I'm just going to copy this, and I'm just going to, let's just in fact make a file, and we'll just call it touch example character data.json. I'm going to put this here. And while I'm writing code, I'm actually going to have this pulled up. I usually do split screens all the time when writing code. I think it can maybe be a little confusing when teaching, but I would encourage you guys to get in the habit. There's a lot of values here. I think I'm just going to pass all of this in as one big character data prop, because I might want to use all of this. And so, excuse me. And so with my character data, I'm just going to do a bunch of destructuring. There's ID, first name, last name, full name, and this list is getting a bit long, so let's write it like this. Title, family, and the image URL. And where I'm going with this is where I want to end up is on my character page. I want to just pass in all of that data, right? I want to say char data equals, my character's data. And in fact, just to get this going, I don't even think I need to use my example data, because we're actually getting real character data back here in this response.data. It does need a home. So let's create some component state. And we'll just call it character data. And we will use the useState hook, and we'll leave it empty to begin with. And now in here, once I get the data, I can update my component state, and we'll do set character data to response.data. And we're going to have a couple issues here, but let's see how far we get and what those issues are. So let's test this out. Let me go back to my home page. And I need to make sure to pass something as a prop. React is not liking that. Now that I have that component state, I can pass that in as a prop. It looks like I also have a typo in my code because I got confused with the destructuring syntax. And so now those errors are fixed, but we might run into some other issues. And I do just want to pause here to see if folks have questions about this character card, or what I just did here with set char data to set component state for my character page, and then passing that in as a prop to the character card, right? Because that's a key step. Tom, yes, sir.
Why aren't you able to, I guess not destructure, but do object navigation for set chart data, I noticed that if you try to navigate through the object um, in like the set chart data, it does not like that. And it requires a lot of extra uh, code to be able to do that. Like, because if you go to your other page where you destructured it, because I forgot what the so yeah, if you wanted to get like, I don't know, image URL, for example, and you go back to your other page. So if you did like response.data.image URL, right, you'd be navigating through the object. If image URL was like a, a key, it should be able to pull that value. At least that was my thought, but
Yeah.
using it in that fashion, it does not like to do that. So is there any particular reason why, or is that just how it's done?
Again, I think as our programs get more complex, it's challenging to talk about the general situation. I think I'd have to see the code. I think what probably is happening, because this is a pretty common issue, is like something has gone wrong, and response data is null. And so somewhere in my code, if something has gone wrong for whatever reason, maybe the API was down or the server was down, and now this data is null and it's not an object, and I'm trying to basically do, null dot something, that throws an error. And that's a really common issue because we're constantly re-rendering and reloading pages and stuff. So if I had to guess, if you're encountering that sort of issue, that could be the cause. In this specific situation, because there's not too much character data in this data object, and I think I want to use all of it. I made the design decision that I just want to put everything here inside one use state and then pass it all in as a prop. Now we will, I think, run into a sort of related issue because if I click to go to a character, we see this type error, cannot destructure property ID of character data as it is undefined, right? Which is really similar to what you're saying, where there's this character data uh, object that's getting passed into our character card. And we're trying to grab that property from it, but character data doesn't exist. And the problem that we're running into is that we have to make sure not to render character card until we've gotten the data. And the reason that this is an issue, and that this is tricky, because the use effect fires after the first render. So when I do a use effect like this with this empty dependency array, it is actually waiting until this character page has rendered, and then it's making the API call. So the very first time that we're doing this, and in fact, let's add a couple console logs so we can see this in action. Let's say a character page. We'll say console log character data is character data, and we'll add a console log and we'll say about to render, aka return all this stuff. And in here, let's just add a console log for our use effect, and we'll add a console log here for setting character data. And this is really interesting to see. And again, I'm going to go back to localhost and let's clear the console and let's look at the flow of execution. So we have all this error, but if we go all the way to the top, we see a character page. There is no character data. It's undefined. We're rendering. This is the very first time that this page component is mounted and rendering. And then we hit this error, which is the problem, and we don't even get to the use effect because we hit the error. And so the solution is we need to use a ternary, and we need to check if character data has anything in it or not. And if it does, we'll render the character card, but if it doesn't, we'll show nothing. And this way, for first render, we don't show the character card. And let's see, it looks like I'm still running into. Oh, there we go. So that's working. So if I refresh the page, we see that a character page, our component is fired up. We don't have any data in component state. We're about to render and return stuff. The first render happens. We don't show the character card. The use effect fires after the first render. We get the data. We update component state because state has changed. The React lifecycle kicks in and our page component renders again. And we see here again on second render character page. And now we have data. And now we render and now we see stuff. And now if I go into the character card and start doing things, now I've got first name and last name. And I guess there was the full name as well. And now I can do image source equals image URL. And we can do the house, which is just family, I believe. And we might as well add their title here. And now we've got Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Robert Baratheon of House Baratheon. And I know I covered a lot of ground there. So Tom, I want to check in to see if that helps and also see what questions folks have or things we might want to dig into around this sort of like React lifecycle component flow.
That kind of helped. I arrived at the same conclusion for rendering, but not for truncating data as far
Yeah.
as
I think that
being able to access, the more relevant data quicker rather than trying to, destructure it through a lot more code later.
yeah, I think I would just have to see the code.
Okay.
Yeah, as our programs get more complex, it just becomes very difficult to. It really helps to see the specific situation. I would say just shoot me the code. Let's actually let me push on. I know I wanted to pause for questions, but I want to make sure we can take a break here. There's one more thing I want to cover. So let me just kind of like recap what's happening here, and then let's see one more thing, and then we'll take a break. So we have a whole lot of good stuff happening here, right? I've designed an app where I now can look at the URL and using the use params hook, grab it, and by using React Router, put it into a page, and I have this 8-character component. And if we look at our component hierarchy, we have our outlet doing all sorts of stuff. And excuse me. And in fact, the A character page now sort of has its own component hierarchy going on. Right? We now have a character card or char card. And to accomplish this, I've added some React component state to my character page, my character data. And I have the ID param. And the way that we accomplished this was in our router, we set the path and I told React router what variable name to use for this URL parameter. So that in my app, when I go to character / whatever, it assigns that to a value ID. Now, this sort of breaks the code because we're now expecting this to be a number. Okay. And ID 8 is, it turns out it's Jamie Lannister. And on our A character page, if we kind of run it through from the top, we create some component state where we're going to store the character data once we get it. I use the use params hook to grab that param 8 from the URL. And because of how I set up the routing, it's assigned to a variable named ID. I wrote a use effect hook that will fire after the component renders that will fetch our data from the Game of Thrones API by using that character ID. When it does, it updates that component state. And we then pass that state down as a prop into our character card component. And we add this ternary logic here to make sure that we don't render the character card until we have the data it needs. Otherwise, it will break. So the last thing I want to show is another hook. And this one is quite friendly. It is called use navigate. And it lets us sort of manually drive React Router. And I think the easiest way to show it is to demonstrate it, and then I'll talk about why we need it. So let me go to our homepage. And let me go ahead and just kind of follow along with the docs here. And I need to import the use navigate hook. It's a little special in that I have to call it and it returns a function that we're going to use in just a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a button. And the button will have it say navigate to character page or ID 2. And when I click the button, I'm going to call a handle click function. And right now, it doesn't do anything. If I go back to my homepage and I click on my button, we see foo. And I think Tailwind wants us to add a little bit of styling here. So let's do border 4, just to make it a bit clearer what's going on. So now we've got the button. But what I want to happen is I actually want clicking on this to take me to the character page for a particular character. So I can use this navigate function and I can give it the path I want to navigate to. So in this case, it would be character /2. And now when I click use navigate, it takes me to that character page and we see Jon Snow. Now, why do I care about this? Well, maybe on my home page, I have an input and I have a character ID and I have a bit of component state. And we're gonna make the input a controlled component. We're gonna set its value to input. And I don't think React is gonna like that name input. So let me change it right now. I think it will conflict probably with the name of the input element, though I'm not sure. But better to be safe. And we'll add the on change. So that when it changes, we update the input. And let me do a little formatting. And it looks like I probably have a typo here. Let's see if we can track it down. By far the easiest way to track it down is to put each of the props for the input field on its own line. So I can try and see where my typo is. And it looks like the typos up here. I'm always making this mistake when I'm destructuring. I'm adding an equal sign that I don't need. So my error was not here, but by making the code better organized, I was able to track it down more easily. And now, I can type in a character ID or whatever. And when I click on this, I want to use that character ID to where we navigate to. So we'll just change the button name to navigate the character page. And over here, we'll change this to go to whatever ID we put in there. So if I enter ID 10, we see that Catlin Stark is ID 10. So that's the power of use navigate. It basically does what React Router DOM's link component does, but it lets us do it dynamically in code and so we can trigger it whenever we want. So it's useful for a bunch of things. So I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have and what's on people's minds with regards to use navigate, or if there's anything else that might be good to review and go over, because I know we've covered a lot of ground with this stuff. So whether it's about React code or anything else, as long as it's sort of focused on what we're covering today, I think now is a great time to touch on things. Okay. Chris, yes, sir.
I was curious. I know we made like character cards the other day on our assignment. I was curious, could you instead like use navigate for like doing a link? Like say you have the character card uh, up on the page. Maybe if you click on that image file or whatever it is, it would just take you to that, and then you can just use the navigate for that.
Yeah, you could absolutely
You
set it
do a
up
link for that
way.
one.
Yeah. And in fact, what we'll see in part 2 is we're going to make a page that lists all the characters and a page that lists favorite characters. So we'll use the character card in multiple places. And yeah, exactly like you're saying, like if I wanted to, I see what you're saying. Like if I went to my home page
Yeah,
and
instead of having to like type in the ID.
yeah, 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 exactly. And we'll see that in part 2, though we won't necessarily need use navigate to do that. And in fact, why don't I just kind of give a really brief demo of that now? So let's say I have some character data, and we're not actually going to use the use state setter yet, but let's say I have an array of character data, and I have an ID and a full name, or we'll just call it name. And let's see, what is our other character here? Robert Baratheon is ID 7. So we're not worrying about how we get this data right now. Later, we'll see how to do it with an API call. But if I wanted to, what I could do is instead of manually doing it like this, maybe what I want to do is characters.map, and we'll do just C for character. And let's just, let me wrap this whole thing in a parentheses and just grab this whole chunk right here. And we'll put it in there like that. And we do C dot name. And then over here, we do character C dot ID. And then we probably need a key property, and well, let's just use the character ID for that. Or actually, it should probably be and I need a curly bracket because that is now a template label. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking about, but this is where we're going in terms of if I want to get all the characters from the API and then like dynamically construct a list of character links. And I could, put whatever I want here. And like you were saying, if I wanted to show an image thumbnail, I could then use navigate instead of the link component. Yeah, great question. All right, I think that's a good stopping point. Let's take 10. And when we come back, we will look at React Router outlet context, which is going to be super cool. Thank you guys, and I'll see everyone in 10 minutes.